Christina Panugan, Dato Awing Apugan. And without much ado, friends in the media, I would like to turn over the microphone to our esteemed resource persons for this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our travel here is called Breaking the Silence, Telling the Truth, the narrative of struggle, deception, and assertions of the indigenous people of the Philippines. This is a story of how we struggle to be recognized, respected, promoted, and protected. The story of falling into the trap of lies and deceptions of the terrorist communists and the continuing assertion of our rights started by our forefathers and carried on by our generations to attain peace, unity, and development in our ancestral domains without compromising our cultural integrity, and find our role as indigenous peoples and as Filipinos. Before I will start, I will introduce the members of the delegation. Ramon Bayaan, Dato Ramon Bayaan is an Ubo tribal leader of Ubo Manubo tribe in North Cotabato. He is the founding chairman of the Pasaka. Next to him is Dato Awing Apuga, son of Dato Gipang Apuga, the chairman of the Salugpungan. From the Atamatic Salog tribe in Talaingo, Davao del Norte. Next to me is Dato Nestor Apas of Langila, Manubo, Langilan tribe. He is also from Davao del Norte, Talaingo, Davao del Norte. I am, on my left is by Christine Banugan, from country holder of Mandaya tribe in Davao Oriental. And I am Bawan Jake Lanes of Manubo, Mandaya from Mukayo, Compostela Valley Province. We will start with the narrative of Bai Christine.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Christine Banugan, 28 years old, the tribal chief of the Mandaya tribe in the province of Davao Oriental. Allow me to share the real narrative of the indigenous people's struggles in the Philippines. Allow me to share my story. I was born and raised in an environment where the community is at war with the communist terrorists. It was in 1972 when the communist terrorists, known as the CPP-NDF, tried to organize our community inhabited by indigenous peoples, but they failed. Until in 1986, when they had not recruited anyone from our community, they killed some of our members, ransacked our houses, and abused our human rights. From then, our struggles, the struggles of the indigenous peoples began. Our environment, our education, our livelihood were disturbed, were distracted, and our peaceful living was disturbed. And that was our life since then up to now. Because of these atrocities, the indigenous peoples decided to fight against the communist terrorists to defend their ancestral domain and to protect and assert their rights as indigenous peoples. That the community and the traditional tribal leaders are under threat by the communist terrorists. But through time, because of the threat, they were able to catch up my father, who was then the tribal chieftain of our tribe, of our community, the Mandaya tribe in Davao Oriental. And they brutally killed my father, having 13 gunshot wounds, together with his brother and my 17-year-old relative on the night of December 30, 2016. Until now, I can still recall how we were brutally attacked in our house in Davao Oriental, even with the declaration of ceasefire by the Philippine government. I can never imagine this inhuman act of the communist terrorists. Allow me to ask this question. Who gave them the right to kill people who will not succumb to their ideologies? And are they really human rights defenders, or are they champion in human rights abuses and violations? allow me to ask another question. How much more blood do we need to shed, and how much more lives do we need to sacrifice in order to put an end to these atrocities of the communist terrorists? At this tender age, and being a woman, I have no choice but to take the leadership and continue the good leadership that my father had started. Because if no one will lead our community, who will? And if none of us will stand up for the tribe, who will stand up for us? I am here to continue the fight of the indigenous peoples for a sustainable peace and resilient development. I may be young to become a tribal leader, but I believe that age does not define leadership. The reason why my community allowed me to go here in the unknown territory outside our comfort zone is to really articulate the real voice of our traditional leaders, to narrate the real story of the indigenous peoples who have been exploited by the communist terrorists for the past 50 years. However, our problem now is that these terrorist support organizations are receiving support and assistance from international organizations because they have a very strong propaganda machinery spreading lies and deception about the indigenous people's situation in the Philippines. Because of these terrorist support organizations, they have corrupted the minds of our people, especially our youth, that according to them, the Philippine government laws has enacted laws that are not good for the community or for the indigenous peoples. But in fact, the Philippine government already enacted the Republic Act 8371 or the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997 that recognizes, respect, protect, and promote the welfare of the indigenous peoples. Thus, we are here today earnestly asking all of you to listen to our call. Stop supporting the terrorist support organizations, especially based here in the United States. Stop believing in their lies and deceptions of the communist terrorists, because we are the real victims of the atrocities committed by the communist terrorists. For the longest time, we have been living in fear, in violence, and our leaders being killed. And as part of this generation, and as a victim of these atrocities, I want to be an instrument to end the communist terrorists, because I don't want the next generation, our children, to suffer the same struggles, to suffer the same atrocities under the communist terrorists. Lastly, the indigenous peoples only dream to live peacefully within our ancestral domains, to continue preserve our culture, traditions, beliefs, and practices, and to fulfill our intergenerational responsibility for the next generations. So help us realize this dream, not for us, not for our community, but for our children, so they can live in a community where there is peace, there is unity, and there is development, and where we can freely and fully exercise our rights with the guidance and protection of our Magbabaya, our Almighty Father. Thank you and good afternoon.